Imagine the world just a few years after the end of the most devastating war in human history. Cities lie in ruins, economies are shattered, and an entire generation is scarred by conflict. In the heart of a defeated Germany, a new, silent enemy emerged: hunger. The winter of 1947 was brutal, one of the coldest on record. For the German people, particularly in the war-torn cities, survival was a daily struggle. Food was scarce, rations were meager, and the future looked bleak. This period was known as the Hunger Winter, and for countless families, it felt like the war had never truly ended. In the midst of this despair, an unexpected lifeline appeared. It came from the very people who had been their adversaries just months before. American soldiers stationed in occupied Germany. These young GIs saw firsthand the suffering that surrounded them. They saw children with hollow eyes and gaunt faces, mothers desperate to find a single crust of bread, and fathers who felt powerless to provide for their families. What happened next was not an official order from high command or a grand political maneuver. It was a spontaneous outpouring of human compassion. It started small. A soldier sharing his own rations with a hungry child on the street, another giving his chocolate bar to a little girl peering into the mess hall. These individual acts of kindness quickly snowballed into something much larger. Soldiers began pooling their resources, organizing collections within their barracks. They wrote letters home, not asking for gifts for themselves, but for food, clothing, and medicine for the German civilians they were encountering every day. They described the desperate situation, painting a vivid picture of the post-war reality that wasn't making the headlines back home. The response from the American public was overwhelming. Families, churches, and community groups across the United States started packing boxers. These weren't just standard relief packages. They were filled with care. Cans of meat, pulverade, milk sugar, coffee, and soap were packed alongside warm clothes, shoes, and even small toys. These packages began arriving in Germany, addressed to the soldiers who had made the appeals. This grassroots effort became known as CARE, which originally stood for Cooperative for American Remittances to Europe. The iconic CARE package was born from this incredible wave of generosity. For the German families who received this aid, it was nothing short of a miracle. Imagine being a mother who hasn't been able to give her child a proper meal in weeks. Suddenly, a knock on the door reveals a young American soldier, not with a weapon, but with a box full of life-sustaining food. The moment these boxers were opened, the tough exteriors that people had built to survive finally crumbled. Strong fathers, who had endured the horrors of war and the humiliation of defeat, broke down in tears. Mothers wept with a mixture of relief and overwhelming gratitude. These moments were deeply emotional and transformative. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the gesture. It was the realization that their former enemies saw them not as a conquered people, but as fellow human beings in need. A German woman from that time recalled, "We had learned to hate them. The propaganda had taught us they were monsters. And then they came and saved our children. How could you continue to hate someone who saves your child's life?" This sentiment was echoed in countless households across the country. The soldiers delivering the aid were often just as moved. Many were young men, barely out of their teens, who had seen the worst of humanity during the war. Now, they were witnessing the best of it. They played with the children they were feeding, offered words of comfort to their parents, and built bridges of understanding one care package at a time. The barrier of language was overcome by the universal language of kindness. A smile, a shared piece of candy, a warm coat for a shivering child. These small acts repaired more than just hunger. They began to repair the fractured soul of a continent. Newspapers at the time captured these powerful scenes. Photographs showed grizzled GIs gently handing food to wide-eyed German children. Letters from soldiers were published, telling their families back home about the impact their donations were having. One soldier wrote, "You should see the look on a mother's face when you hand her a can of milk. You'd think you just gave her a block of gold. It's the best feeling in the world." These stories helped shift the narrative, from one of victory and defeat to one of reconstruction and reconciliation. This informal aid from soldiers laid the groundwork for larger, more organized efforts like the Marshall Plan, which would later help rebuild Western Europe's economies. But it was these initial, personal acts of compassion that rebuilt something arguably more important: Trust. They demonstrated that even after a brutal war, humanity's capacity for empathy could triumph over hatred. The relationship between the German people and the American soldiers was transformed from one of occupier and occupied to one of helper and helped. These events had a lasting legacy. For generations of Germans, the story of the American soldiers who shared their food became a founding myth of the post-war era. It shaped a profoundly positive view of the United States and fostered a deep and enduring alliance. Many of the children who were saved by these acts of kindness grew up to become leaders in the new Germany, always remembering the generosity they received in their darkest hour. Decades later, reunions were held between the former GIs and the children they had helped. Now elderly themselves, they met again, not as soldiers and civilians, but as old friends, bound by an extraordinary moment in history. Tears were shed once more, but this time they were tears of joyful remembrance. The stories were retold, the old photographs were shared, and the incredible impact of those simple acts of giving was celebrated. It is a powerful reminder that history is not just made in the halls of power or on the fields of battle. It's also made in the quiet moments of human connection, in the sharing of a meal, and an act of unexpected kindness. The story of the GIS and the German families is a testament to the idea that even in the aftermath of unimaginable destruction, the simple act of helping another person can plant the seeds of peace and build a bridge to a better future. It proves that compassion is the most powerful force for healing the world has ever known. Thank you so much for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel for more incredible stories from history. We'll see you in the next one.